Right, this is our first lecture for EH 202. We're starting in 1865, which is the post-Civil War, or right at the Civil War, into the Reconstruction to present day. And our class is divided into 3 units. The first of the units is Realism and realistic literature. And realism was really kind of an answer to romanticism, like a criticism of the Romantic period, which was kind of spreading through Europe at the time. So realism began in France in the middle of the 19th century and spread to Europe, to Russia, and then finally to the United States. And so where the romantics kind of favored nature and a love of nature and the individual against society. Realism started looking at more of the individual's place within a society and expressing how life is as it's really lived. So, characteristics of realism: you have your attention to detail, and the details are really what sets realism apart. Even little mundane details that you don't think that really matter. It's that over exaggeration of details that really helps set the reality of what these authors are writing about. And so that's going to be like a really key factor here in realistic literature. It portrays life as it really is lived in day-to-day life, and that's everything. That's the good times, the bad times, the ugly times. There's nothing realistic writers try not to hide anything from their reader, because real life is that way. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. Your characters are regular, ordinary people, mainly from the middle class, which was really kind of developing at this time. Before, where you had your upper class and you had your lower class, there was not a lot of gray area in between. You either had or you had not. Now this middle class is developing, and you have your hardworking, middle class people that are getting represented for the first time in literature. There's a lot of focus on the characters' motivations, actions, and emotions. Psychology was a huge field at the time. Sigmund Freud was writing about and kind of studying the inner workings of the mind, and people were interested in psychology, and so you're going to see a lot of that influence in realistic writing. There's going to be a use of simple, transparent language. There's nothing flowery or florid or, heightened about the language that's used in realism. They mainly use an omniscient narrator, an all-knowing narrator, and they focus on the truth, which is called verisimilitude. And then there's a large criticism of society and society's response to the actions and the events that were happening at the time. And so, again, just kind of going into detail about every single one of those little sections for just a couple of minutes. It's that attention to detail is what's going to set this literature apart from other literary movements. And they really make up the magic, because they provide so much detail that you can't really help but believe in the reality of what you're reading. It makes it very real, very like a virtual reality in your head. Daily real life. They wanted their writing to reflect daily reality in our lives, and that's called the quotidian life, usually by scholars. That's the drama, a daily routine, that we live through day to day, even the things that we think are mundane. We get up, we brush our teeth, we, get dressed. Like, that's reality. That's, we don't wake up in some kind of fantasy movie and with a full face of makeup, ladies, and your Prince Charming is coming. This just doesn't happen that way. And so realism wanted to portray that in a way that just represented that quotidian life, that daily true life. Ordinary characters. This is another departure from that romantic movement. These are regular, ordinary folks living ordinary, mundane lives, and the things that happen to them. And we are going to see that a lot in realism. Class. So, middle class was rising. It was trying to find its place in society, and the individuals in that middle class were trying to figure out where they were laid. And so in Romanticism, where we had individuals apart from society or against society, realists want to focus on an individual's place within his or her society, where they fit in that greater scheme of things. And so that is definitely a departure from Romanticism, where you were against society or the values and things that society was trying to push down your throat. When we read Thoreau and Emerson and all of that. Psychology, again, here, Freud is off developing theories on your unconscious, your id and ego, and your brain, dream life, repression, and that's going to become the foundation for that science. And so realistic writers were, and everybody really was interested in psychology at the time, but they were interested in understanding life and society and the world, and really dug deep into their characters' psyches. What were their motivations? What were their actions? The reason for their actions, and expressing their emotions. So whereas we had elevated language in the Romantic period, realism writers wanted to mimic the way that regular, ordinary people spoke to each other, which is where you're going to get a lot of your colloquial language, your slang, your different dialects. Writers like Mark Twain, which we're going to read in this section, using a lot of that ordinary speak, or even the language of the lower classes and that kind of thing, which did not have a place in literature before. And they would fit their style of language to the subject that they were writing about. Omniscient narrator, all-knowing. We love those narrators. And that all provides that detail that is the cornerstone of realism writing. So omniscient narrators can move from place to place, character to character. They can get inside and outside of the situation, and they know all the details. And that helps to promote that feeling of reality. The truth. So a lot of realism writers are more like journalists in a lot of ways, that focus on the attention to detail and expressing the truth as they see it. And so that helps promote or create a world that is real or true to the reader. We call that verisimilitude, writing the truth as we see it. And journalism, which was on the rise during this time, and they were really heavily influenced, realism writers were, the journalistic techniques and that attention to facts and details. Criticism of society. They often addressed and were critical of the social and political conditions of the world that was going about. You had socialism, capitalism at the time. There was a lot of political... at this time, go ahead and be dismissed. And so they were really critical of those social and political situations that were happening, and that played a big role in their writing. So with this establishment and development of the middle class, education is no longer a special privilege of the upper class. The middle class now had the ability to receive an education. They could go to school, and then on that other note, you had the printing press, technology, books and materials. All that had evolved so much that they were so much more accessible to people, which helped the spread of literacy. And so, but a lot of realist authors chose to forego the novel and not writing in a book, and instead publishing their works in serialized form in journals and newspapers and magazines, which increased mass readership. It had people reading from week to week and waiting for the next episode. And so they use that as a medium a lot of times, those realistic writers.